What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to another video. Tonight, I'm with my friend Zach, and we're going on a night dive. Good? Yeah. Alright, sweet. You're good. Nice. It's about 45 degrees Fahrenheit tonight, so decently chilly, not too bad, but there's a little bit of fog on the water. If you look, you can see it. So this particular spring has a super high salinity, or high salt content, and that's because of the nature of the limestone that the water is flowing up through from the aquifer. So the limestone in this area is actually pretty high in potassium, magnesium, and sodium, which causes the water to be pretty salty. Now, if you taste it, it's pretty salty. It's not like ocean level salty, but compared to what's typical of Florida freshwater springs, it's pretty high salt content, and that actually impacts the wildlife that lives this spring. And one species in particular that we'll probably see plenty of tonight is the blue crab. My guesstimate is we're gonna see 7 tonight. We'll see as the night goes on whether I'm over or under that. I'm gonna start out with the wide angle lens and explore around the spring, see what's around, and then based on what we find, probably go back out with the macro and try and get some up close shots. So here goes nothing. We plunged through the fog and dipped beneath the water's surface and began traveling up the spring run. There was notably 0 aquatic plants in the run. In this area, it's most likely due to overuse in the summertime. The water was hazy at first, but soon gave way to better visibility as we got closer to the spring vents. We trained our flashlights and began scanning every direction for signs of life. The first signs weren't so welcome. Strands of poop were everywhere. Some were piled up on the sandy floor, others were suspended in the water column and came sailing past us. There was a lot of sediment stirred up too, affecting the visibility. Then came our first blue crab, and with it quite a few large invasive tilapia that collided with the crab. This poor crab was going through it, as the tilapia came back and ran into him again. Having had enough, it promptly dug its way down into the sandy substrate, safely out of the way of incoming invasive fish traffic. As we moved farther up the run, we came across yet another invasive fish species, the armored catfish, or pleco. These fish are stunning, there's no doubt about it, but they're native to the Amazon and don't belong in Florida Springs. Sadly, they're pretty widespread throughout the state as a result of the aquarium trade. We started to notice more and more geological features as we continued up the run. The tops of the limestone were exposed above the sandy substrate of the spring. It had an almost yellow-orange color to it in some areas, perhaps a result of the unusually high mineral content of potassium, sodium, and magnesium. As the aquifer is recharged by rainfall, water filters through the limestone, picking up these minerals and increasing its salinity as it flows up from the ground, creating a brackish environment that is over 100 miles upstream from the ocean. On one of the limestone features, we came across what I think is a white catfish. If I'm right, this is a native species. I find I see much more catfish in the springs after dark, and oftentimes around limestone features like this, as some of the younger and smaller catfish species like to hang out in the aquatic caves of the aquifer. All of a sudden, an eel swam right up past the catfish. This is an American eel, a native species with a very interesting life story. It didn't stick around for long and disappeared into the dark, but don't worry. There's more where that came from. By this point, we had reached the first of several spring vents where the water flows up out of the ground. The visibility was getting very bad, and I realized it was because the vents were filled with tilapia. These are blue tilapia, and they are native to North Africa and the Middle East. These fish are big, abundant, and outcompete native species, and they were everywhere, making an absolute mess. But as I neared another spring vent, I saw what looked like a shimmering mirror in the distance. An enormous school of different fish species came into view. These are Atlantic croaker. Croakers are a saltwater fish named for the sound they make when spawning. Adults are often found in deep offshore ocean environments, but young croakers can often be found in estuarine environments. And although they've had to travel quite a ways through freshwater to get here, this salty spring is a great habitat for them. There were easily hundreds of them swirling around, and as the school passed on by, blue crab number 2 came into view, hunkering down beneath the bustling croakers perched on a ledge at the edge of one of the spring vents. Not far off, I spotted crab number 3 hanging out in a crack in the limestone. This individual was pretty curious and actually came out to inspect my camera. At the edge of the spring, a pretty large cooter was hiding out under a ledge. She seemed fairly sleepy, however, and didn't leave the safety of her shelter. The air trapped in the recesses of the limestone ceiling up above the turtle were pretty cool to see, but I left her to her beauty rest. It was time to explore the spring vents themselves, so Zach and I headed off to find a promising crack in the limestone. The spring was pretty shallow overall, but certain cracks ran down past 20 feet. As we cruised over the small canyons in the limestone, a few more blue crabs popped up. They were carefully hiding amidst the rocky features, but they were no match for our crab finding powers. We racked up quite a few crab sightings in a short time, hitting crabs number 4 to 7 pretty much back to back. I found a hole with decent space to dive a little ways into, so I grabbed a breath and headed down. As I peeked beneath the overhanging rock, a labyrinth of limestone revealed itself. Tiny passageways led off in all sorts of directions, and it was rather disorienting. I was content to look from afar and head back up to the surface. Remember, it's never worth taking chances with overhead environments underwater. I could easily enjoy these secret tunnels from a safe distance. Back up topside, I came across a young tilapia. These fish are prolific breeders, so I wasn't really surprised. It was kind of cute though, but also sad as they do still cause problems for the native species. Finally, I caught sight of another eel, and this individual was quite big. It seemed particularly keen on filter feeding between this one area of limestone, and I headed over to get a closer look. As I approached, an annoying pleco came blasting through, spooking the eel, but thankfully it didn't go too far. This American eel was about 2 feet long. These specialized fish will travel all the way to the Sargasso Sea in the Atlantic Ocean to spawn, where their young are then dispersed by ocean currents throughout the Americas. These young eels will travel inland up freshwater systems until they find a suitable environment to grow up, all for the cycle to repeat. To prepare for their journey to the Sargasso Sea, eels experience some wild changes. They'll darken in color, increase their fat reserves, and their eyes even double in size, just so they can see better in deep ocean environments along their journey. American eels have experienced some severe population declines, and they are considered endangered on a global scale, primarily due to commercial harvesting pressures and blocking of migration routes. This eel was probably the biggest I've seen in the springs, and they've been known to grow faster in brackish environments, just like the one created by this salty spring. So who knows, it might be getting close to beginning that final long journey out into the Atlantic. I was about ready to switch to my macro lens, but wanted to poke down one more time into one of the spring vents. I gave the camera to Zach and then went and dove down. It was similar to the last vent, lots of tight tunnels, and not much room to go anywhere, especially with my long fins. As we headed back to the boat, we stacked up on some more crab sightings. Crab number 9 was out sidestepping in the sandy shallows. It was a scene that might as well have been from the ocean, but here we were in a Florida spring. Unfortunately, that barren sandy bottom isn't normal, even for the salty spring. At this point, we were solidly over my guesstimate of 7 crabs, and then I spotted a weird shape in the sand. I wiggled my finger back and forth, and sure enough revealed crab number 10, almost entirely buried in the sediment, only its eyeballs and antennae sticking up above the sand. Honestly, I would have never seen it if it hadn't been for the dark sediment its digging must have churned up. Anyways, that's it for the crab count. I don't want to accidentally recount a crab when we come back with the macro lens, so we capped it at 10 and headed downstream and finished swimming back to the canoe. That's like the most tilapia I've ever seen. I mean, they're swimming in between my legs and running into me. Yeah, not supposed to be here. As soon as this guy dries off enough, we will switch out to the macro lens. Check out my beach towel though. Spider-Man. I will say this is not at all my favorite process because one wrong drip and you got a water droplet right in the middle of your shot for the rest of the evening. So I try and get myself as dry as possible before doing this, but it's always a little sketchy. Drips. All right, now we're good. All right, macro lens is back on. Gonna go back up, give one more go. For a split second, I thought I spotted some green vegetation, but it was just a tiny oak branch resting on the sandy bottom. We made it back to the spring vents. The whiskery face of the catfish was still poking out between the limestone. I quickly caught the tail end of another eel disappearing down into one of the spring vents. And then, here's the derpy-looking face of a tilapia. You can't see it, but right as I was trying to shift focus to this other eel, the tilapia actually shot towards me and hit me square between the legs. It does not feel good. But after I had recovered, something new and small finally caught my eye. A tiny fish had emerged from one hole in the limestone, crawled a short ways away, and then disappeared into another hole. I was instantly intrigued and got to work. Turns out the limestone was riddled with these holes, and almost every one of them had one of these 2 to 3 inch long fish living in them. These are naked gobies, and it felt like I had stumbled across a goby hotel. I found one individual that was purple, and I stayed locked onto him with my camera. The little fish was incredibly fast moving. It shifted positions around the entrance of his tiny cave in the blink of an eye, frequently disappearing and then reappearing a minute or two later. Its face reminded me of Gumby, which I've never actually even seen Gumby, but it still reminded me of him. There's just like something about that upturned mouth just looked like a claymation figure. This stunning little fish even had a yellow-red stripe on its dorsal fin. Naked gobies are a marine species ranging from New York to the Gulf and often find their way upriver. Once again, this salty spring has provided a perfect underwater island of habitat for a typically salt-loving species. The goby disappeared for a bit, and then an identically sized translucent version suddenly appeared at the mini cave entrance. At first, I thought it might be a different individual, but then looking back through the footage, I realized both the purple goby and this one had a tear in the left pectoral fin, meaning this fish was the same individual and had just changed colors in the span of a few minutes. This was wild, and you can see and judge for yourself based on these stills from the footage. It even appeared to be coloring back up to purple. But it vanished back into the depths of its cave, and this time stayed put for good. It was getting close to 3 a.m. at this point, but I had to stop and admire some of the finer details of the blue crabs. These crabs are common in a variety of salinities, including some freshwater environments, so it's no surprise that this salty spring is a particularly good home for them. Although they're a common animal here in Florida, they're really pretty amazing if you look at them closely. Their claws are orange-red, and so are the tips of the small spikes that line their brilliant blue shells. Crabs use their eyes and antennae to read their surroundings. Their eyes detect changes in light and motion very well, and their antennae are used for sensing smell and changes in water currents. They are both scavengers and hunters, picking up micro bits of food from the sediment, picking apart dead things, and even ambushing smaller prey. But of course, pretty much everything else also eats them. It's funny to think about all the wildlife stories that happen underwater in this place in total darkness with no humans around to witness. I'm just happy we were able to get a glimpse into this salty freshwater world, if even for just one night.
You know what they say, there's nothing like getting crotch blasted by a tilapia. But anyways, it's about 3 a.m. It's pretty cold. Then we're gonna call it a night. So we're gonna paddle back to shore. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. And you gotta shake it out so it looks like